Chapter 20, The Border and Across. Yellow lamplight flickered in the tent as Shinoro reported to Lusomi. "We can't move faster, lady. We began the march fully supplied from Helfried's magazines. The delays we have encountered forced us to use up those supplies, and we are now living off the land. This means the march, whether we like it or no, will be slowed." "And what are the Wensmen living on? I doubt they've brought many supply carts away from the field." "Lady, they've been foraging from the start, which makes it all the more difficult to find food in their wake." "So you're saying we won't be able to bring them to battle before they've had a day or so to rearm and perhaps bring in fresh troops?" "We can only do what we can do, lady." She had always managed to avoid voicing comparisons between Shinoro and El Coriat, but sometimes it was difficult, extremely difficult. She finally said, At the very least, we'll have the advantage of knowing we've beaten them once already this year, and a good many of them will have that fact in their minds as well." El Coriat would have said that. "Why didn't you, Shinorio?" He only nodded. "Will there be anything else, lady?" "No. Thank you for your time." She watched him leave, careful not to show that she was displeased, not by gesture nor facial expression. Ordering this group of proud, temperamental hill chiefs and lordlings for battle was hard enough, without any of them taking into their heads that they could disobey Shinorio because he did not have the Lady Lusomi's full confidence. Dr. Gobnash looked around the room. The lords were all on edge. He had summoned them, but had sent individual summonses to all of them. So clearly, they thought, that he had wanted to see them alone. As for the reason, well, even the ones who had a few or no royal ambitions would not want to risk the spite of Dr. Gobnash. He spoke. "I thank you all for coming. As you have heard by now, messenger birds have come in from the frontier telling of the defeat and death of King Narnash. It is necessary to choose someone to rule in his stead." He paused. "I have decided to give my support to Lord Delthorio." As expected, there was a moment's silence, then uproar. Even the ones who had not royal aspirations had either been on the point of bartering their support to one candidate or another, and in some cases had already made tentative offers. None of them were disposed to accept an Ascos turncoat. At last one stepped forward out of the crowd, shaking his fist and declaring, "No Wensman will serve under the likes of that Ascos scum. He broke off as Dr. Gobnash made a gesture with his hand. The Wensish lord clutched at his throat as his face purpled. Then a moment later, he fell and lay still. Sudden silence came over the room. "Are there any other objections? King Delthorio is willing to be merciful to all who swear to follow him. Now, who will be the first to swear fealty? Or who will be the next example?" Was she hearing a note of reproach in the scout's voice, or was it imagination? Not that scout, tired, dusty, and weather-beaten, might feel cause for reproaching the army of Ascos for allowing the Wensish army time to prepare itself, but he would not likely show that reproach before her. "Have they managed to rearm?" "Not altogether, lady, but they will likely manage that in the next day or so. They've got food, though, and they've got about 500 fresh troops." "Thank you. Find yourself some food and drink and a place to rest. I may wish to send your leader a message." "Yes, lady." Not for the first time, she had exerted a good deal of self-control to prevent herself from publicly shouting at Shinorio. Who else could she have chosen in his place? All the others had their own faults: touchy temper, brash overconfidence, lack of experience. It was too late now to take command directly into her own hands. The battle's eve was not the time to entirely disrupt the leadership. She spoke again, thoughtful. "Yes, lady." "Will you be ready to use the Talisman again? Foolish question. Yes, lady. Given the weather we have marched through to get here, you'd best do what you can to ameliorate the after effects. I'm talking for the benefit of the rest, Dockel. You know all this. He understood just what was going on, for he bowed slight and said, without smile or grin, Yes, lady, I'll do my best. The Wensish army formed up in a line, a small knoll anchoring the right flank, left protected by a force of light cavalry. Lady, we have to keep in mind that from this distance we can only see the men themselves, not the state of their arms and armor, and surely not inside their heads. There will be no way, outside of an actual battle, to discover how much or how little effect the previous lost battle and loss of their king will have on them. Now, with the enemy across the field from them, Shenorio had abruptly become decisive. He had issued brief but clear orders for the Ascos line of battle, and a line with one flank protected by a force of light troops, the other bearing the bulk of the cavalry. Lucy was almost ready to forgive him for the lackadaisical pursuit, but not quite. Thoughtful, Shenorio said, can you use the talisman against a section of their center, just before the two forces meet? We might well be able to break through the line and bring a force of cavalry to make use of the breach. Thockel nodded. Right. Rumor has it that 3 lords had cooperated to bring the Wensish retreat to the frontier, and 2 of them have agreed to accept the authority of the 3rd during this battle. I suspect that this 3rd, whoever he is, has plans for making this battle the beginning of his attempt to seize the crown of Wentz. He swept his eye over the enemy line and his own formations. Order the advance, Thockel. Please make ready. Order the advance. Thockel, please make ready. I'll expect you to decide the time for yourself. Right. Lucy wondered if it was only the sight of the formed enemy that Shenorio could be so firm and decisive. The army of Ascos began to advance, and the Wensish army began their own advance in response, though it was a clearly ragged and fitful one. Maybe Shenorio was wrong about battle being the only way to assess the state of Wensish morale. After a few paces, though, the commanders had brought order into the Wensish line, and they came on steadily. Arrows and slung stones flew in both directions, and men went down. Neither side wavered. Then Thockel called the north wind's full power on the center of the line. It was a little less stunningly effective than it had been against the horsemen, but for all that, the center was wholly disordered. Though commanders worked and swore, the formation was still ragged when the two forces came together. As the battle joined, the section that had been hit by the wind struggled to hold its cohesion. Whether because of the wind, the memory of the last battle, or both, after a brief attempt at battle, that part of the army gave ground once more, then suddenly turned to flee. A party of horse that had been held ready drove toward the gap, intent on wheeling and coming on the rear of the force to the left of the gap, while the infantry were already wheeling to the right to roll up the line in the other direction. The unknown Wensish commander had seen the danger at the time the wind had descended, and was leading several squadrons of his own cavalry to retrieve the situation, if possible. It was not known until afterward that he had led that force himself. For all his efforts, though, he was too late. Shenorio had held back another group of cavalry, who were now sent through the gap to keep the Wensmen off the backs of the first Ascos cavalry. The first Ascos cavalry force, after brief difficulty traversing the area where the north wind had struck, took the enemy in the rear, and the Wensish line began to unravel. The second cavalry were able to delay the Wensish reinforcements just long enough, for the Wensish army was breaking up, more and more of them turning to flee. In the end, after a great slaughter of Wensish cavalry, much of the Wensish phalanx still held, formed into a tough square, with pikes presented on all sides. "They ought to have been destroyed," raged Quahendaran Nevis, his voice harsh in the crowded pavilion. "To what purpose?" inquired Shenorio calmly. Mutterings and murmurings to one of the other lords around them rose and fell like the sound of sea, as soft lamplight winked on polished gems and metal. "To what purpose?" echoed Quadahiran. Sorry. "Because they're Wensmen, and they're armed. Is that purpose enough? We've had many years now when Wensmen could oppress Ascos simply because they were Ascos. If we are killing Wensmen only because they're Wensmen, we're starting down a rough path, and one that has an unsure ending. There are still more Wensmen than Ascos. All the more reason to finish them. And we've beaten them once, we'll beat them again. And if they ambush patrols and cut off patrols and cut off foraging parties and wear us down bit by bit, we burn their villages and we slaughter their herds." The young man was leaning forward a little in his intensity, almost as though ready to spring like a cat. "Thereby making ourselves even more beloved. No, it's done. The phalanx has surrendered, given up their arms, and are being allowed to return to their homes. Each of them knows if they are taken in arms up against us again, their lives are forfeit." "Agreed," Lusomi spoke up. "Quadahiran, the matter has already been decided. Arguing over what has been done is futile. What we need now is to decide what to do next. The lord in charge of the Wensish army died in the battle. Seems his name was Dungarash, a name I'm not familiar with, but at any rate, he left them pretty much leaderless, and none of the other petty commanders is willing to take responsibility of surrendering on behalf of Wentz. It would seem that we must march on Wentz until we reach their capital." "Is there any argument on that?" There was. A Lord Visario de Goriat spoke, a man with loud opinions and a following which, though small, still was the size of that required. Wow. Okay. Nope. Which required that those opinions be heard. "Lady, we've marched far and beaten 2 Wensish armies. Wentz is no longer a threat to us. Let us go home." Quadahiran was quick to respond. "I don't agree with much with what Shenorio has said, but he is correct in one thing. The Wensmen outnumber us. If we go home now, in a few years' time, some new Wensish king will have gathered a large enough army to send us against us again. We must at least make an attempt to see that any Wensish kingdom is set up is less of a threat to us." "Thank you, Quadahiran," said Shenorio, "for your support. At least there's one more reason for us to march on Wentz. Dr. Gobnash is still alive." There's more murmuring. "This is certain?" There was a touch of fear in Lord Visorio's voice. "He was on the battlefield where Narnish was slain, and Thakal smote him with the winds." "This is true. However, his body was not found afterward. I, for one, will assume he is still living until I know otherwise." "Thank you, Shenorio," Lusomi said. "I agree. We will march on as soon as possible." The Wensish lords came in sullen answer to their king's summons. Most would have ignored the summons altogether, save for the knowledge that Dr. Gobnash stood behind King Dalthorio, as he had stood behind King Narnish. Speaking in whispers and low mutters, they tried to guess at why they'd been called together. King Dalthorio sat on his throne before them, his face expressionless, save for an occasional nervous frown. Dr. Gobnash stood behind him, and to his left. At length, Dr. Gobnash stepped forward, his plain, sand-colored robe standing in contrast to the massive colors that were the Lord's. You have been called together for a purpose. Look and learn. He snapped his fingers. The door behind the throne opened softly, and through it floated a man's supine body, floating on air, hands at his sides. Another followed it, and another, 5 in all. There was little sign of the kind of death they had died, but they themselves were recognized by the audience. There was more than one murmur of, "Dark Destroyer's teeth." "These 5, announced Dr. Gobnash, "were found to be in a conspiracy against their king. As such, they have died. Let all the rest of you take this lesson and learn from it. What you do in secret may not truly be secret." The lines of bodies continued to float through and amongst the gathered lords, so that all could see them, with the lords themselves moving back from them to avoid touching or even being too near them. They then floated back out the door through which they had come in, and the door closed softly behind them again. Dr. Gobnash said, "I am sure you will all understand that the king will suffer no treason. You are dismissed." When the last of the lords had filed silently out, Dr. Gobnash turned to Delthorio. "Now this lesson has required such a concentration of my powers that many other things have had to be let slide. I think we can count on the lesson to hold, at least in the short term. During that time, there are certain measures I must take. I shall present a list of the materials I need, and you will sign the authority to purchase them. Is that agreeable, Highness?" The chief magistrate of Goron, tall, slim, and gray-haired, wearing a long-sleeved green robe as befit his station, met Lusomi and the Ascos commanders in the main gate of the city. "There is no point, lady," he said. "No point at all in the usual fiddle-faddle of you requiring our surrender and making you wait while we pretend to consult the matter. What troops we had were pulled away to fight in that useless battle, and while we might have manned the walls, that would merely have made our fate the worse. I can only ask that your terms be merciful. I see no point nor any merit in destroying your city, or even in burdening it unduly. We will want 10 pounds of gold from each of your chief citizens, and 1 for each citizen, according to your most recent census." The magistrate flinched. "Lady, you speak of not burdening us unduly? Such a cost will bid fair to reducing the whole city to penury." "Magistrate, I have a fair understanding of how well off your city is. Suppose I make you a bargain. You have 3 days. For each day before that day, you may subtract 20 pounds of gold. For each day after, add 1 copper per citizen." "Lady!" She cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I make no further bargains. Take this or leave it." "Yes, lady." "If it is any comfort to you, magistrate, your city is being treated the same as any other in our line of march, all of whom are in just the same state as yours." The magistrate's expression said that the situation of other cities was no comfort to him at all. "Interesting news," Shinorio said. "A week ago, the magistrate sent a bird to the capital informing him that he could not possibly hold out if we advanced on him, and asking for more troops for the garrison. A bird has just come from the capital to the magistrate carrying orders to hold the city at all costs, and it comes from none other than King Delthorio Hanavoto." This caused an immediate uproar for those gathered in the room where Lusomi conferred with her commanders. "King Delthorio? How does an Ascos traitor come to be king of whence?" "What else do we say, Quetta Huron?" Lusomi responded. "When inexplicable things happen at once, Dr. Gobnash is behind it." "But why would an otherwise shrewd man such as Dr. Gobnash choose to elevate the likes of Delthorio?" "Because it gives Dr. Gobnash more power to do as he likes. Del Thorio is unlikely to have any other support. But Gobnash can terrorize the other lords into line. And while Del Thorio sees the day-to-day business of the kingdom, Dr. Gobnash takes care of his own affairs, such as preparing his measures against our coming. There was silence. A fly droned through the air. Don't be overly worried, Lusomi said. We've beaten them before, and we have even triumphed against Dr. Gobnash's schemes. There is little reason why we should not do so again. Now, how are the preparations for our march? Cartloads of supplies were brought to Dr. Gobnash's workroom. There are several bales of pig skins, as well as several casks of what claimed to be pig's blood, though dark rumor circulates as to what kind of blood it might really be. There were several chests which were said to be pig's innards, though no one could claim more accurate information than that which a butcher in nearby town told them. There were a number of other sealed chests, and rumors about their contents ranged from eerie to the ridiculous. Dr. Gobnash, the doctor, had moved all these things into his workroom, and no one, not even the least knowledgeable regarding the doctor's notions and temperament, asked any question nor made any conjecture in the doctor's presence as to their contents or purpose. When the last deliveries were made, the doctor called a man and said to him, "Go tell the king that I am making preparations for the approach of the army of Ascos. I will send to tell him when I am done." He then went into his workroom and locked the door, as even the most foolish had not the sense to avoid trespassing there. "Go tell the king that I am making preparations for the approach of the army of Ascos. I will send to tell him when I am done." He then went to his workroom and locked the door, as if even the most foolish had not the sense to avoid trespassing there. "This is a change, you asking me to accompany you on a risky enterprise?" Shepakayosha's face was grim. "If you'll think a bit, you'll understand that it's not something I'd suggest if I didn't see serious need." "What's your plan, then?" "We go into the capital and snoop around a bit. Maybe write on some walls?" "Perhaps. But mainly I need to sniff out some magic. I'm not much good at sniffing magic. The only magic I can use is a talisman. But there are more dangers than Dr. Gobnash, and I need someone to watch my back while I sniff. And you always seem to have more luck than any man has a right to." "Luck? Me? I only seem to have a knack for getting into trouble and surviving those troubles. Mostly because someone else helped me out. Someone such as you. Which was a fortunate circumstance that I was along. I mean, look, if you're afraid to come, tell me. I'll find someone else." "Well, in order to avoid putting you into the trouble of finding someone else, I'll overcome my terror and I will accompany you. But do you know what my greatest terror is?" "No, but I doubt it's something highly ridiculous." "You think a scold from Lucy is ridiculous?" Shepakalish snorted. "I think you yourself have a great difficulty looking at life without laughing at it." They paused in the evening's dimness. "Now we have one more step to get into the city itself. When we get inside, I will be very busy, and we'll not have time to converse with you. The thing I have to do requires some time to complete, and that permits Dr. Gobnash enough time to become aware of my presence and take his own countermeasures. The less interruptions I have, therefore, the less likely we are to be forced to deal with any of his nasty devices. And I keep watch. Yes, keep watch, and make sure that no one, such as City Watch, interrupts me. You may find it necessary to use the talisman to save us. Keep in mind that the use of the talisman will send up a beacon bright as day for any who have magic sense. In his right hand, Shepakalish held a small blue sphere that seemed to have a faint light within it. He patted a small leather pouch at his belt, apparently satisfied that all his necessary equipment was ready. They then stepped into a rocky landscape where the earth was trembling. Cracks were opening in the ground, dust was rising, and the mule was shying wildly. Sometimes the route through the hidden ways is a choice of insalubrious paths, Shepakalish shouted through the noise. Then they were in a back alley, dark and smell-laden. Shepakalish put the small blue sphere against the wall about the level of his waist and left it there, held by some force of its own. Taking his leather pouch, he went down on one knee. From the pouch he took a handful of stones in various colors, which showed up oddly in the light from the blue sphere. He then began to lay down what looked like a random order, one here, another way up there. By the time he had taken out the handful of stones, it was clear that he was following a pattern, though the random handfuls of stones made it necessary to lay them mostly in a scatter, seldom 2 or 3 close together. Thokkel kept watch from inside the alley's mouth, out of sight from the street. If the city watch came, he reasoned that they would come marching, not stalking, and he would hear them. While waiting for the watch, or anyone else, he noted the pattern Shepakalish was laying. Suddenly he recognized the pattern. That's the Erse pattern from the dwarf's bones. Shepakalish glanced up at him briefly, then continued with his work. It is indeed the Erse pattern, which word is a corruption of the Erois pattern, which in turn means power. Now, if you will hush, I hope to have this done before Dr. Gobnash stands over me, admiring for my great fund of lore. He continued to work with sure and steady fingers, laying the stones down in their proper design. Finally, he looked up and said, "The time-consuming part of this is done. Now comes the part which will, figuratively, pound on Dr. Gobnash's door and shout, 'There is magic at work in this city!' and bring him trotting over with the spinners and giggling corpses following him to ask politely, 'What's going on?' Something of that sort. Now once I have set this thing to working, it must continue its work, and no matter how rushed we might be in leaving here, I dare not leave any of these stones behind. Possession of even one of them will allow Dr. Gobnash to track me and attack me wherever I might be. So hold yourself ready. When the pattern is run, I want to be snatching up the stones and leaving." He then spoke a low phrase, in which Thokkel heard the words, "Erois," and the stones flickered to life. Lighting up briefly in sequence, they made it seem that a glow was running through the pattern. As Thokkel watched, however, there was a change. After running through the pattern, ceasing to shine in succession, suddenly one red stone midway through the pattern did not flick out after its turn, then continued to shine a slightly duller red. Each time the flicker went over it, it shone, but each time the flicker passed, it merely shone a little less brightly. Then a green one began to do the same, and a yellow one. After a time, there were 6 stones of various colors at various points in the pattern, which continued to shine. Perspiration shone on Shepakalish's face, and he drummed a finger on his thigh, clearly concerned about the time it was taking. Thokkel, catching some nervousness from him, could scarce prevent himself from peeking out of the alley mouth to see if he could see any sign of Dr. Gobnash rushing up, or perhaps flying up, or even a few charging along the street. Or if Dr. Gobnash comes, will he use something like the hidden ways and suddenly appear amongst us? Several things had happened almost at once. The stones ceased their flickering, save for a few that had been holding their light, and they flared briefly and went out. There was a faint sound like a faraway chime, and a blue light on the wall flared suddenly blood red. Shapa Kalish snatched up the stones in handfuls, stuffing them in the pouch. The mule, who had until been standing calmly, whinnied. "Thuckle, get over here! We're going now!" The urgency in his voice brought Thuckle to his side in a jump. There was a brief snap of sound and light. A figure stood before them, visible only as a dark shape with the light from Shapa Kalish's stone gone. "Wild dancing whirlwind, come against this enemy here. Fierce flying pig guts, too close." The small man's hand touched his arm, and they were back in the earthquake land. A crack in the ground was racing towards them. The mule reared in terror. Another step, and suddenly they were in a pine-scented forest, with a wind sighing through the trees. "We have to go a little further. Dr. Gobnash will track us, at least to the previous place, possibly here. But if we take another few steps, we'll be safe." The next step took them to a battlefield where warriors in chariots wheeled back and forth, casting javelins and shooting arrows at each other. A younger man, often not much more than a boy, drove each chariot, while an older man did the fighting. The next step took them to a fair green plain, where large creatures grazed, creatures of something of the look of wild cattle. Another step took them to a hot forest, where birds and animals screamed their harsh cries in the depths. Another step, and they are outside the camp of the army of Ascos. Okay, and that is all for tonight for chapter 20. Okay, have a good night.